All right, I want to bring in Colonel Cedric Leighton now, retired of the U.S. Air Force and president currently of Cedric Leighton Associates. Good to see you, Colonel.
Good to see you too, Jonathan. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you, and delighted to have you here for your insights on this. Is it time to do something much more dramatic in Syria?
Well, from a diplomatic perspective, I think the answer is yes. I mean, looking at what Dominic Di Natale was saying and what others have said, this is a very big issue from the standpoint of the Middle East. But then you correctly pointed out that there are going to be so many different players in this particular action. So the key issue is, how do you achieve international consensus? How do you make it work so that each of the players in Syria is really represented and that real action can take place from a military perspective, if that's where we go.
And how hard is it to do that when the Russians and the Chinese standing firmly on one side against pretty much the entire rest of the international community? Maybe Venezuela and Cuba would be standing alongside them, but how do you change their actions?
It's very hard to change their actions. I mean, when you look at what happened in Iraq in the run-up to Operation Iraqi Freedom and the shock and awe phase of Operation Iraqi Freedom, there was clear Russian involvement there. There was clear in Iraq. There was also some Chinese involvement. So in some ways it's similar to that situation. The difference is that the Syrian military is actually a bit smaller than the Iraqi military was at that time, but they also have significant armaments in terms of the Air Force, the Syrian Air Force, as well as Syrian tanks. They have about 4,000 or so Syrian tanks that would need to be taken out in order to be effective from an air campaign perspective.
So any sort of air campaign would be extremely difficult for the West to carry out.
It would be. It's not impossible, but what has to happen is you have to select the different targets that you're looking for, and many of those targets are going to be targets that are on the move. For example, tanks. The reports that tanks are out there, going after Homs and other cities that are active in the Syrian rebellion. That presents a good, lucrative target, but it's a target that comes up at the moment, and so those are the kinds of things that have to be handled on an as-needed, as required basis. There are other targets out there that include the command and control systems of the Syrian military and the Syrian government, as well as, of course, the secret police and the intelligence services, which are really one and the same. Those are the kinds of facilities that you would want to hit, knock out of commission, and then you would have a better chance of achieving the humanitarian goals that we say that we like.
But presumably, it's not like an easy fight if you do that either, in terms of simply the aerial power. I'm imagining, I don't know, Colonel, you know much better than me, but I would imagine that Syria has a pretty decent air force with a lot of Russian MiGs.
They do, absolutely. Well, for example, you look at about a series of several hundred workable Syrian MiGs. The low number is about 356, the high number about 600. And the reason for the disparity in numbers is you don't always know how many are maintained to an operational level that would allow them to fly and fight. Those Syrian MiGs, which are fairly numerous in number, would have to be taken out first, and that, along with the air defense system, would be a key component to any air campaign that would go on. So it would become a very difficult issue to choreograph. It would become a very difficult area to prosecute, because you don't know where everything is all the time. But if you have good intelligence and if you have a clear understanding of where these weapons are housed, then you have a better chance of actually getting after them.
And aside from actual direct intervention such as that, what is your view, Colonel, on getting weapons directly to the opposition and letting them fight the battle purely on their own, but while giving them the weapons to do so? A lot of people say, too dangerous, we don't know who the opposition are, we don't know where those weapons are going to end up. What's your view?
Well, the same issues applied in Libya, and I think the answer is in this particular case that it would be important to arm certain elements of the Syrian opposition. And of course, people will tell you one thing that they think you will want to hear and then do something else, and there's always a risk of that. But I think it's much more important from a strategic standpoint to go after the Syrian regime because of its close alliance to the Iranians, to really send a message that this kind of behavior on the international arena, in the international stage, can no longer be tolerated. And it's time that we really do say, to take an action in this particular case that says enough, of the killing, enough of the murdering of all of the people in places like Homs and Hama and Idlib and all those other places in Syria. It's time for a completely new regime and to get rid of the current regime. So it would be, I think my preference would be go after the current regime using the Free Syrian Army as much as we possibly can, mitigate any efforts by al-Qaeda in Iraq and others to really strain that relationship and go in and make sure that they do as much as possible on our side, and then finally, if necessary, support them with air power, at least to the extent of a no-fly zone being set up. So far, Assad has actually not used his air force against the people, at least not in a significant way. But he still has that option. So it would be key to keep them in their hangars, keep the Syrian Air Force in their hangars, and use that as part and parcel of our efforts to bring peace to a war-torn nation.
Interesting. Colonel, I don't know if you want to touch these questions from our viewers, but I'm interested if you do and if you have any knowledge or views on them. One is from All for Jury, asking what the Turkish delegation was looking for in Geneva at this UN meeting today. I guess what the role of the Turks is, and also I don't know if you have a view on this. Chris Service asking what an Islamic nation like Syria how they would view a female Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton. I guess his point is, do they give her words equal weight because she's a woman?
I think they do, and I'll take the last question first. It's been very interesting to watch Secretary of State Clinton's and before her Secretary of State Rice's actions in the Middle East, and it seems to me that generally the Arab nations tend to respect each one of them in their own ways. So I would say that each of the Arab nations that we are closely aligned with don't seem to mind the fact that we have a female Secretary of State. I think they have no alternative but to deal with Secretary Clinton, and I think in this particular case they're doing a pretty good job of working with the United States, especially Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and that stands to reason that she's been pretty effective in getting them on board with certain aspects of our efforts against Syria. On the Turkish question, the role of the Turks is very, very interesting because they are really at the geographically, as you and the viewers well know, at the crossroads between Europe and Asia, and they have historically been in a position of great power in the Middle East. In this particular situation, the Turks have a golden opportunity to play the honest broker. With the current regime of Erdogan, they are really seen as a role model of how to achieve democratic actions, how to achieve a democratic governance process within the Muslim world. Turks, of course, are not Arabs, but they do serve as a role model to certain elements of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, and they are also a role model to the Syrian opposition. And in that sense, that role is to be welcomed, and that will also allow the Turks to give proof that they can be trusted on the international scale in relations with Europe. It will also allow them to serve as a counterweight to the Iranians, and I think that would be in our interest to bolster the Turks in that role and help them help us counter the Iranian threat that's out there.
All right, Colonel Cedric Leighton, always fascinating to get your viewpoint. Colonel, thank you very much. Colonel Cedric Leighton, U.S. Air Force retired and president of Cedric Leighton Associates. Have a great day, Colonel. Thank you for being with us.
You too, Jonathan. Thanks so much for having me.